Hey guys, my name is Alan SamuraiPanda Bunney, the CEO of Panda Global. Welcome to the next PandaCast episode. For those of you who want the audio only, the link is in the description for the audio. And the topic today is an interesting one. It is kind of fun, not really as heavy as others, which is how to talk to people about esports. And when I say people, I specifically, usually I mean old people. But there's also people who just outright hate the idea of esports. And you're going to see as esports become more and more popular, this becoming a thing where people are going to hear about esports and then ask you, because I'm assuming by watching this video, you are familiar with esports. What is esports? Now, me as a physician, I'm in a unique position where I'm meeting a lot of patients every day, a lot of new faces, and the patients will Google me. I don't always, volunteer the information that I'm the CEO of the largest 1v1 team in the world. They say, "Oh, I saw this on Google. What is this esports thing?" And I'll have to explain it over and over. In a week, I probably explain it to 10 to 12 people at least for the first time. They've never heard of esports or have a vague recollection or recognition of what it is. And even sometimes I'll have parents telling me how they don't let their kid play video games, and then I actually have to educate them and let them know, well, video games can actually be a viable career path, admittedly for a very, very small percentage, but it's not as bad as you think. So it gives me a unique position as a physician to be able to tell that to my patients, and hopefully their kids will thank me one day. But back onto the topic of how do you talk to these people about esports? How do you talk to someone that is outright refusing to believe esports is a thing or has no idea what it is? And how can you convey it in a way that they understand and that they get excited about it too? Or they kind of get the value and the long term of it as well. So first things first, when you're talking to someone about esports for the first time, you have to classify them into one of two categories. The first category, which is the category that is easiest to talk to because they're very malleable, is what's esports? That's the category. Is when esports is brought up, someone says, well, what's esports? These people are people who are usually a lot more open-minded about the idea of esports. They're just curious. They just want to know and be educated about it. So there's really no convincing you have to do. And the second category, I would say, and this is overgeneralization, obviously making two categories, but the second category I would say is esports aren't sports. People who come into the conversation with this like kind of a notion of what esports is, or they like heard about it once and like, that's so dumb. Like esports isn't sports. There's not athletes and yeah, that type. I'm sure you all seen them. Overwatch being played on was it ABC or Disney? I think ABC the other day, and or NBC it might have been. Yeah. And there was a ton of people on Twitter going about saying, "Oh, this isn't sports. Oh, what is this? Where is this crap?" Okay. It's a very large part of the population. These people who are adamant deniers of esports' validity and the basics of what esports is, it can be young, can be old, can be anyone in between. And there's no real age group. Actually, I tend to find the younger ones are a little bit more closed-minded because they played sports in high school and college, and they have a notion of what sports is in their head. And esports, because it has sports in the name, can't be a sport because you don't do this or that. Do not argue with them. I'm talking from experience here. If you argue with them, if you say, well, no, it's really a sport because of this, you won't win. You might get them to be like, I guess with your definition of it, but not really with my definition. Or they'll say, fine, sort of, they'll agree with you just to stop you from talking. That happens a lot too. No, the way to win these people over is you agree. You say, yeah, you're right. Esports aren't really sports. The esports industry is wholly different than the sports industry, and what I usually say is I think it's more akin to the entertainment industry, like music or movies, than it is sports. Immediately, you shift their frame of thinking, and they're like, oh, you're not trying to encroach on my territory, on my knowledge of what sports are. So I'm not offended anymore, or not as offended anymore. So that's personally what the technique I've come to develop and hone when talking to those kind of people. Now, don't get me wrong, and this is going to be kind of a fun little section here. I did argue with them for many years. I was a vehement believer that esports were sports until I eventually realized, why do I give a crap that esports are sports? Why does that matter to me? I don't watch sports. I actually actively dislike many sports. I'm not a sports guy. All right. The irony that I've been on ESPN.com, so many times being quoted in articles, and I've gone to 4 sports games in my life. I was one of the only people on campus at University of Michigan that didn't go to a football game that wasn't a foreign exchange student. It was nuts. But anyways. So I used to adamantly, it is. And I tried all sorts of different ways of arguing with these people. I tried the science of it. That was my favorite argument, I think, was the science of it, was that, they did tests on NASCAR drivers, okay? And the tests were specifically of cortisol level, okay, of the level of stress hormone that is released in the body in terms of essentially activity or being stressed out and being in high pressure situations. They can swab the inside of the cheek, and they can measure the cortisol level, and this cortisol is a stress hormone. And they measured it in pro gamers, and they measured it in NASCAR drivers. And they found in the study that they had equivalent amounts of cortisol released in their system during competition. That means the stress that was felt by a NASCAR driver was equivalent to the stress in the competition felt by the pro gamer. NASCAR drivers literally put their lives on the line. They can die in those cars. So it's a big deal to say that they are feeling equivalent amounts of stress. Now, they also did studies in the same, I believe it was the same studies, a series of them, where they looked at the dynamics of the body, heart rate, sweat, how much strain does pro gaming put on the body? And the whole study was comparing to NASCAR, and it was shown basically to be the same thing. Your heart rate increases when you're competing. You're sweating more when you're competing. Your body activates that sort of, fight or flight mode into the fight mode when you're competing. So I would argue with people, well, physiologically, the body is basically determining this is a sport because this is the same, they feel the same way as in NASCAR. Well, biology is a thing for me. I'm a doctor, so it to me that's a very compelling argument. Well, it wasn't very compelling to them. They're like, NASCAR isn't a sport. Oh yeah, I had a lot of people tell me that NASCAR isn't a sport. So then I started defining, where sports begins and ends for those people. That was another wild ride where I tried to essentially get them to I call it a yes ladder, where they continue agreeing with you, and then they realize, the logical leap from the last thing I said yes to the thing that you've been talking about is not that huge. And I try to yes ladder them through what is a sport. So you say, okay, so what is a sport? Okay, is tennis a sport? Yeah, okay. Is badminton or squash or those sports? Well, yeah, okay. Well, what about ping pong? Is that a sport? I would actually lose some people here. Some people say, no, it's not a sport. And I would be like, I don't understand how in any way, shape, or form you could say ping pong is not a sport based on the competition, based on the activity. Have you seen professional ping pong players? They are blasting from side to side. It's actually really hard to do what they do. But I actually had people say, no, that ping pong is not a sport. But admittedly, most people say yes. Okay. So ping pong's a sport. Okay, is golf a sport? There's not much physical activity involved there. They don't sweat. Well, they're out in the sun. That's about it. Well, people say yes. Yes, golf is a sport. Okay. So, in golf, you're calmly going from one place to the next and hitting a ball, right? So is pool a sport? Here's where a lot of people start having difficulty wrapping their heads around things. Pool. is there enough physical activity to consider a sport? It depends on how, in their head, what is a sport to them, right? Well, it involves any sort of physical activity and accuracy, and things like that. So you could consider it a sport, right? For pool, if that's how you consider it, like the physicality of it requiring, physical knowledge of hitting the cue. But for people that say physical activity defines a sport, they say no, pool isn't a sport because you're not physically active enough. In which case you can then argue what is physically active enough for a sport, and you realize they don't actually have a hard definition and they're just sort of making it up based on their gut feeling, which actually some people just came down to, well, that's just the way I feel. I just have a feeling of what's enough activity to determine what a sport is. Because you're saying pool isn't a sport, you're saying that other things, or like shooting, is shooting a sport? Trap shooting, for example, where you just stationary, just aim and shoot. Is that a sport? Can it be a sport? So, you get increasingly more esoteric, and they realize, the jump from pool or trap shooting, something like that, to video games is actually not enormous. And at that point, some people say, well, in video games, accuracy matters a lot with the controllers, with their mouse and keyboard. Like, that's what differentiates someone between good and bad. There's a lot of physical activity that is required, and a lot of physical knowledge that is required there. Oh, man. Most people at that point, or before they get to that point, they're just done with the conversation. They just don't give a shit because they realize that, like, I'm picking apart the way they even think about sports, and they just don't like it. It was a lot of fun arguing, is esports a sport? And what is a sport? But again, bringing it back, the best way to win over those people that they'll even listen to you and actually understand and be accepting of esports is just by agreeing with them. Esports is not a sport outright. And if you do that, then you open the door, because they're a lot more receptive when it's not challenging their perception of what sports are. Okay. So once you've successfully identified them and transitioned them into a state where they are open to listening to you, which, like I said, if they just are open-minded, they're curious, you don't have to do any transition there. Then there's a few things that I've used in the past that are very effective for why esports are popular. Why do people watch esports? Well, a big thing is, when I grew up, so one of the arguments is that the perception of video games is different now, because you're talking usually something that's a little on the older side. And I'm a nice demographic. I'm 32 years old. So I tell them, well, when I was growing up, I was a nerd because I played video games. I played a lot of video games, and that made me weird. But now, you're weird if you don't play video games. You look at the kids growing up now, and they're all playing video games. One of my friends, his sister is a cheerleader, popular kid at school, and she plays Fortnite. It's weird to not play video games. Even my mom plays Candy Crush. Everyone plays something. What do they play? Is more of the question of, rather than do they play. So that said, they start to understand, oh, you're right, like, people play a lot. And then why do you watch basketball? Why do you watch baseball? Why do you watch these other sports that you can play? Well, don't you want to watch the people that are really good at the thing that you do, like the thing you can't do? Like, a lot of people will watch because of that. It's very compelling, and that's the same thing. You watch pros do the things that you can try at home to do, but you can't ever be as good as them. That's kind of one of the points there. And then the children growing up argument, I call it, essentially, is where you say, kids growing up now, this is what they're exposed to. You look at a 3-year-old, they know how to use an iPad better than my father does, okay? They type faster than anything than he does. And, they are getting increasingly more exposed to the internet, to the influencer age, where they're directly connected to, other people, to consumers, or to, popular figures. And, for them, it's not, they don't go out and play soccer with the neighborhood kids as much as they go online and watch their favorite YouTuber, and maybe they do comment on it or go on social media. Like, it's a lot more of a wired era where you're plugged into the internet and you're constantly doing things. And because of that, things are transitioning to more of that digital stuff rather than the more physical things. And then the next argument is the millennial exodus argument. Like, traditional sports are investing in esports, and this is a big justification for a lot of people. You say, yeah, like, NBA, there are a lot of NBA teams that have esports teams. There's NHL teams that have bought esports teams. There's an NFL team that's bought esports teams before. The Dallas Cowboys bought Complexity. The owners that rather. So there's a lot of people that are investing from traditional sports into esports because they see it as a next wave, because they are losing a massive amount of millennial fans because people are not watching TV anymore. They're not watching sports anymore because they live in on-demand, they live in a Netflix era where they don't even have cable anymore. They can't watch this stuff. They don't look at billboards when they drive past things. Okay. They use ride sharing so they can be on their phone the whole time. They don't go to stadiums. They can't see, they don't see the games there. They don't see the advertisements there. Like, this demographic is leaving traditional sports at an alarming rate, and they see this, and they're a coveted demographic of this usually young male age of like 18 to 20, depending on who you're talking to, what market you're talking to, is like 25, 26 to like 32. And this demographic is this cord-cutting demographic is so appealing, and all the traditional sports are losing them. So they see, where are they going? What are they watching? What are they doing? Esports. I have a lot of friends that watch basketball and love esports, but for some reason I don't really see many people who love baseball, other than like MVD, or people who love football. There are a couple out there, but not too many that also watch esports. A lot of esports fans are just really fans of esports. And this, again, as a generality based on my personal experience and anecdotal experience, but that's just how it feels a lot of the time, is that they really only watch esports. I'm an example of one. I don't watch any other sports. I barely know like who LeBron James is, which I'm sure if there's an earlier Pandacast where I brought up something about basketball and I had to read off an article because like I don't know these things. But that's sort of the the extent of my knowledge, more or less. So I am of that demographic. I don't have cable. I haven't had cable for years. Like, I only do it on demand. And unfortunately, and yes, I'm talking to you, gamers use ad blocker everywhere. So you can't even advertise to gamers. So that's, I think 85% of gamers use ad block on the internet. And I try to turn off my ad block for almost everything that I use frequently, like Reddit and stuff like that. Because I try to give back to them, and I'm conscious of that because we did run articles on our website for like PG Stats. I think we made $5 to date from all the PGR articles, like the first 4 or 5 PGRs that we did extensive articles on, and then they were seen by thousands and thousands of people. We made like $5 off of advertising for that because everyone used ad blocker. We never really did that for the money, but just kind of disappointing to see. So, sorry, where was I? No, wait, I lost it again. I was talking about, the demographic thing. Sorry, I was going a little off topic there, but the millennial exodus argument of basically millennials are not watching traditional sports anymore. So traditional sports, are then validating esports by coming into esports. That is an argument that works very, very well to convince people, if everyone's doing esports, it's a big deal. All of these different industries are doing esports. It must be a big deal. Heck, you could just say Mike Tyson just bought a team in esports. Dead serious. 2 days ago announced it. I've never heard of the team, and they do Hearthstone only, which is an interesting choice. But he has a team. And then, at that point, I would say they are convinced that esports is a big deal. And when they ask you, what is esports? Well, esports is just like a regular sport, but, it's sort of an umbrella term. Like, sports is an umbrella term for all different sports. A lot of people are under the conception that esports is all one big thing, and no, they're very different. It's difficult, though, for someone that doesn't understand the idea to wrap their head around different genres and understand that even different shooters, like Call of Duty and CSGO, are just different types of baseball games. One's like arena or like football. Let's say one's arena football, the other one's like a regular American football. So it's you can keep going with that conversation to talk to them about it, but then usually goes on the conversation of how I have a team and how I basically have players that wear my jersey that I sign, stuff like that. So I would say that with this things, and sorry for the tangents, I sort of get lost in things sometimes. You can pretty much talk to anybody about esports and be able to give them a compelling argument enough for why esports is important, why it will continue to be a big thing, why it is a growing thing. And they'll usually be like, oh, cool. Like, this is awesome. I'm like, this is really interesting stuff. And you're right. This sounds like it's going to be a big industry. And I talk to people who are 85 years old, older. When they're older, they don't really care about this stuff, down to like 12. Telling them about esports, because I have a lot of kids that come in that don't know what esports is. They have no idea, and I explain to them what esports is, and they're like, "Whoa, I didn't know this whole world existed." Strange, because I usually only talk to the ones that play video games about it. But yeah, so if you find yourself in the position where you have to talk to somebody about esports and they don't believe it or they don't understand it, try to be open about it. Try to spread the word, spread the gospel. You are the missionary, you're the preacher. You are telling them and not hoping necessarily that they'll fall in love, but at least hoping that they'll get it. They'll get why it's a big deal to you and to millions of others around the world, and why it'll be a big industry someday, because it will be. So that's it for this topic, for this PandaCast. Thank you guys again for listening. If you have any suggestions for what I should do next week, please leave it in the comments. I'm running low on topics to talk about right now. I know I'm sort of doing general esports stuff in PandaCast, but I can go more narrow if people request it. I will catch you guys next week. Remember to keep it PG. Yeah, that's a much better ending, I think. I'm going to roll with that.